Hi, and welcome to the National Jewish Book Club online talks. I'm Yuri Pomerantz-Dauber, the director of Jewish Book Council Book Club Department, and I'm excited to be here speaking with author Joel Ben Izzy. A quick note about the Jewish Book Council, and then I'll introduce Joel. The Jewish Book Council is a not-for-profit organization dedicated to the promotion of books of Jewish interest. Find out more about us at www.jewishbookcouncil.org. The National Jewish Book Club is a new program of JBC's Book Club Department. Each year, Jewish Book Council selects 16 titles, fiction and nonfiction, from the breadth of Jewish literature. These titles are presented in a guide with information on each book and discussion questions. For more information, visit the Book Club section of JBC's website. This program is designed to allow participants to engage with the books in a way that interests them the most and includes this series of online conversations. And now, Joel Ben Izzy. Joel is an internationally known storyteller, author, and story consultant. Since graduating from Stanford in 1983, where he studied English, creative writing, and storytelling, Joel has traveled to world gatherings, telling tales, always with a specialty in Jewish folklore. In addition to his performances and workshops, Joel has recorded 6 award-winning CDs of his stories. He is also one of the nation's story consultants and executive story coaches, with a client list ranging from the Federal Reserve Bank to Pixar Animation Studios. His memoir, The Beggar King and the Secret of Happiness, was published by Algonquin Books in 2003 and is now in its 7th printing, and has been translated into 15 languages. His forthcoming novel, Snow and Oranges, is a fictionalized memoir and will be published by Dial Books for Hanukkah 2016. He lives with his wife. So a couple of things. One is to say that this book was included in the National Jewish Book Club because it came across my desk when it was first published, probably put there by Elizabeth Charlotte of Algonquin in 2003. And I read it at the time and thought it was lovely and promptly gave my copy to a friend who never gave it back. So I didn't read it for a number of years, and it stayed with me. I remembered it as a book that I really enjoyed, that was interesting, and so when it came time to select the first year of National Jewish Book Club books, I put it on the list. Since then, I reread it about 3 times in preparation for today's conversation, and to create book club discussion questions for the National Jewish Book Club, and I get something out of it every time. So it's really one that I very much enjoy, both the stories and Joel's own story. So he's here today to talk to us. And so my very first question, Joel, what exactly does it mean to be a story consultant for the Federal Reserve Bank?
It's a funny thing. Well, first, Mary, thank you for that introduction. You know, the funny thing is the world of storytelling takes me to all these places. There's sort of the world of the imagination and Helm and ancient Jerusalem and around the world, but it takes me to a lot of consulting settings, and the Federal Reserve Bank was kind of a great gig. There was a particular branch of the bank, you know, it's huge, and there was a particular branch of the bank some years ago where things were happening so fast and stuff was hitting the fan at such a rapid rate in the economy, they said, you know what, we actually have to stop, take a step back, think about where we've been, where we're going, and how we can actually go from being just reactive to proactive. So let's understand what our journey's been that got us here, and let's think about where we're going. And where they were going was to the land beyond the curve, the land ahead of the curve. And they've actually done really well, that department, in sort of doing that. But a big part of that was for them to gather for a weekend, understand what stories are, what journeys are, and then reflect on their own.
That's great. So one note is that for those of you who are watching, there is a question and answer button. It may be on the top right or bottom of your screen. So if you have questions, please feel free to chime in and ask us, and we'll try to get to them in the order that they are received. So a question about the book now. Of all the stories in the book, how did you choose the 2 that make up the title? So the title actually is from 2 different stories. It's The Beggar King and The Secret of Happiness. So how did you choose those as the title of the book?
Well, it's a funny thing, you know, as I was writing it, The Beggar King was pretty obvious, because the story of the Beggar King, which is, you know, of Solomon's journey when he removes his ring to learn the secret of illusion, and he's cast across the desert by the great demon Ashmodai, that echoed my story. So that's a story that kind of echoes the book. That was very natural. But I wanted something more than the Beggar King, and I was looking for something. And my editor, actually, no, my agent, Dorian Karchmar was my agent at the time, and she said, "How about one of the other stories in the book? Let's just go through the list." And we said, "The Beggar King and the Lost Horse." No. "The Beggar King and the grasshopper who jumped to the moon." No. And we went through them. She said, wait. "The Beggar King and the Secret of Happiness." She said, "That's great." She said, "There's something nice about that." And so that's kind of stuck, those two titles. And it's, you know,
Right.
writing is it the title changed the book a little bit even as it writes. It's a dynamic process.
Absolutely. So along that line, were there other stories that you considered including, or did the stories, you talk in the book about sort of a story that came to you at a certain moment. So were these stories that came to you during this time and that you felt really made up the story, or were they considered and others that were not included?
It's a great question. Finding the stories that open each chapter was relatively easy. There were a few that I wanted to include that I had to cut because the tone was wrong, or they didn't really set the tone for the whole chapter. Just a couple. The writing of the book was hard. Well, actually, I put it this way. The first 2,500 pages were easy, right? But then getting rid of that and carving back to the story I really wanted to tell, there was a lot of cutting out. And I remember at one point, my editor sort of looked at the first 60 pages and said, "This is too long. It takes too long to get going. Rewrite it, make it shorter." And I rewrote it, and it was 85 pages. She said, "No, even shorter." And I rewrote it, and then it was 125 pages. Even shorter than that. So at some point, I had to scrap it and be able to dive right into the story, and really let go of a lot of like sort of inside jokes and brilliant, clever stuff that just didn't add to the story. It's the work of a writer, you know.
Yeah, I almost wish we could see that as a separate little novel, or memoir.
That's what they always say. They say stick it in a drawer, and you can. So bits and pieces are going into my current book.
Great. We'll talk about that one in a little bit. During your initial reunion with Lenny, he says that maybe the loss of your voice was a gift of a lifetime. So I'm sure, reading the book at the time, obviously that was not the way you were feeling, but by the end of the book, or now, so many years later, do you see that as at all true?
Absolutely, yeah. We get gifts that we don't recognize at the time as gifts, and it's what we make of them. And I've been blessed to have a lot of help to be able to find meaning in this gift, and it really has changed who I am. I mean, my life is one thing before that, one thing after that, and I think it's changed the way I listen and the way I relate to people and the way I appreciate life. So it was absolutely a gift. I still feel the same way.
That's wonderful. So if you were to write the book, the book was it written? It was published in 2003, but you were writing it around that time or a few years before. So already over 10 years ago. If you wrote it now, would it be any different?
That's a really good question. It probably would be different, but I started writing in 98. In 1998, when I couldn't speak, or just kind of a voice that was like described in the book. I wrote an article for the Washington Post called "A Narrator's Nightmare," about what it's like to be a storyteller without a voice. And that article kind of grew into the germ of the book. So I don't think I would write it very differently now. It really captured the experience of that time. That said, I was delighted in your introduction to hear that you dug it out and reread it. And some years ago, I was an artist in residence at a temple in Newport, Connecticut, and in introducing me, the rabbi there had talked about sort of the lessons we learned from loss, and he had this great quote. He said, "Life is the sum total of what we've lost divided by what we learned from it."
Wow.
And I said, "That's beautiful." I said, "Can I quote you on that?" He said, no, you can't quote me on that. I said, why? That's really a lovely, beautifully put phrase, and I just love it. He said, you can't quote me because that's from your book. I was quoting you. I said, okay. I said, I better reread this thing. So I sat that weekend and reread it. It was a Shomer Shabbos house sort of out in a place where there was not room to go. So I thought, I'll reread it. And I thought, I feel pretty good about the book. But the last read through was sort of omit needless words. And I found like occasional words and phrases that, I could have said that in 3 words instead of 5. But I don't think I'd change the overall sentiment. I'm pretty pleased with it.
That's great. At the end of the book, when you had the successful surgery, but you couldn't speak for 3 weeks, and the doctor handed you a pad of paper and said, finish your story. Was that where you started writing this, or did that come before that?
I had started thinking about the story before that. I mean, when I wrote that article for the Washington Post, but the tone was very different. It was it's funny. I mean, you have book clubs, so they think about writing and writers. There was this article I wrote for the Washington Post, The Narrator's Nightmare. I thought it was the best thing I'd ever written. It's one of those things you hear about, which doesn't happen very often. Writer sits down, puts it all out, it just comes out perfect, and it's like, there it is. And I was so pleased with this, and I said, oh, this is great. All I have to do is expand this into a book. And as I expanded it, one by one, every little brilliant gem in that piece, I had to go. I had to cut out every single line. I had a great story about my father going to see Harpo Marx give a lecture, and what that was like, and how from the moment Harpo Marx opened his mouth, nothing was right anymore. Because Harpo Marx was the silent one, and he sounded like Groucho, and how disillusioning that was. I had all sorts of things, but the tone of that article was kind of bitter, because it was a man writing without it was me writing saying I'll never be able to speak again, and boy does this suck. So it was bitter and dark and funny. Of that article, the only piece that actually remains in the book is the line, "People make plans and God laughs." So it's funny. Yeah. So I began before, but that pen and that pad of paper, it really started me thinking.
Okay, so have you had the chance to be someone's Lenny? So Lenny, mentored you and seemed to have some unconventional methods. Have you had the chance to do that with any newer storytellers? And if so, have you used some of the methods that Lenny put you through?
Put me through. That's a funny way you put that. I've had a lot of chance to mentor, and I'm often finding people who are either in a work context, trying to tell their stories, leaders and nonprofits I work with, or other people looking to tell their stories. I don't work that way. I don't. That sort of harsh Zen master slap you in the face, that Zen master kind of student wants enlightenment, goes to the Zen teacher. Teacher says, you don't want it badly enough. Student says, yes, I do, yes, I do. No, you don't want it badly enough. Yes, I do, yes, I do. You don't want it badly enough. And they're by a stream. The teacher takes the student's head, shoves it under the water, and holds it there for 30 seconds, then pulls it up. Student's gasping for breath. And the teacher says, when you want enlightenment as much as you wanted air just now, then come back to me. I don't do that. I like to tell those stories, but that sort of that really harsh. I'm generally a pretty compassionate guy, and as was Lenny, and his way, very true. But I like to think I'm a little less damaged and able to help people a little less harshly.
Great. So you have a new book coming out in a few months, and it's a fictionalized memoir. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I do. It's in fact, I'm in my office now, and you can see up on the bulletin board a bunch of there are pictures from. I'll just hold it up. Let's see. These are pictures from when I was a kid, and I'm sort of and newspaper articles from when I did magic shows. There's a little bit of it that goes in the that it starts in The Beggar King and The Secret of Happiness, and people have said they want to know more about this kid. So I sort of dove back into that. It's called Snow and Oranges, and it takes place over the 8 days of Hanukkah, 1971, in the suburbs of the suburbs of the suburbs of Los Angeles, and it's about waiting for it to snow in Los Angeles and looking for a miracle. It's a time when my dad is sick and going into a hospital for a surgery, and it really is it revolves around a time of seeking, wondering if any of this stuff we hear about God, about Maccabees, about miracles, is at all worth believing in, or maybe, as a 12-year-old boy, I should just adopt cynicism and say this is all chara, if I can use the Hebrew phrase. So it's that kind of tone, and it revolves around a particular story that I've loved and told for years called The Orange, which is the orange part of Snow and Oranges, and the snow is that dream of snow that would turn my little suburb of LA into the village of Helm. So, and it is, as you say, it's a novel, and it's coming out with Dial, and Dial Books Dial was a division of Penguin, and now Penguin's merged with Random House, so now I think it's called Dial a Random Penguin.
Right.
And the editor there, Laurie Hornick, or the editor and publisher, had read Beggar King and The Secret of Happiness and said, boy, why don't we meet in New York and see if there's something you could do that would speak to sort of younger audiences, because Dial Books for Young Readers. So while it's aimed at middle grade, I know that the adults who I'd let read samples of it have just loved it and said, well, this is not a kid's book, this is really a grown-up's book. So it's very funny, and it's a little bit dark. And as far as the novel aspect of it, as I worked with the story, maybe because it's further away, it seemed like a novel was the thing to call it. But to be honest, I've never been very happy with this distinction between fiction and nonfiction. There's a way, in fact, I've never liked the phrase nonfiction. Nonfiction is a way of identifying something by what it's not. It's a little like you have two kids, right? And I say,
Yeah.
oh, there's Eli and Ezra. Are they non-girls? It's like, or like even the phrase nonprofit, which I have problems with. Identifying something by your IRS status is never a great way to do it, right? So to me, between fiction and nonfiction, there's a kind of a spectrum on that, and I'd like to think of it as being on the spectrum closer to the made-up truths as opposed to the sort of the literal truths.
Well, that's actually a theme that I want to talk about. It comes up a bunch in Beggar King and Secret of Happiness. Lenny says two different things that sort of go along with what you were just saying. One is that a good story is true whether it happened or not, and a bad story, even if it happened, is a lie. And also that a story is a golden lie that speaks the truth. So how does that sort of fit in with this fiction or not fiction? And what is a bad story?
Oh, that's a great question. So it does fit in with a fiction, nonfiction. I think that we maybe it's the digital age a little bit. Maybe it's technology. We have the idea that like, oh, this is true. Well, because it's on YouTube, it must be true. Oh, it's on Google, it must be true. Truth, and I think in the book I make a distinction between truth with a capital T. There are all kinds of things that happen that just aren't true. They may have literally happened, and you could record it, and it's there, but it just doesn't really get the truth. So to me, when you find those things that sort of capture the larger truth, that's what we do with stories. I think that's what we try to do with writing, and it comes through in some nonfiction and some fiction. Another storyteller I knew said, all my stories are true, some of them actually happened. So I think that you know, to me, what's more interesting is this book getting at some truth? And I think the other question you asked was what makes a bad story? Wow, there are many ways to do a story bad. Many ways to kill it. Sometimes I've done workshops, and occasionally there'll be a couple in the workshop, and couples have a whole series of ways. It's like, oh, why don't you tell the one where at the end we find out that the guy is actually dead? So there's many ways to do it. I'd say that most important is a story that doesn't work doesn't come from the heart. There's lots of techniques you have with stories. You want to sort of structure it. You don't want to give away the ending first. You want to sort of lead people into it. You want to check in with the audience. There's many techniques, and I teach them and work with people on them. But most important is tell something you care about. And what I find is that most people in the right setting, which is relaxed and comfortable, and when they're talking about something they really care about, they become really good storytellers.
That's great. So I know you've held auditoriums of adults in rapt attention with your stories. What do you think it is that attracts us to stories and to being told a story, which is a much different experience than reading a story?
That's a good question. I think that stories play different roles at different times. I mean, it used to be if you lived out in the country and life was kind of dull and nothing ever seemed new and everything was the same old, you sort of waited for that story to just take you far away and show you something new. At this point, though, I think most of us are absolutely deluged with TMI, too much information all the time. And we have so much grasping for our attention, eyeballs on screens, and intake of information. It used to be they did studies and said if you just live in a city, you'll get like 2,000 messages a day telling you what to do, how to dress, what you should smell like, where to eat. That was like 30 years ago. Now there's probably 20,000 messages a day coming at us. And so as far as the reason stories are crafted and shaped in a way that help us make meaning of all the rest of it. And there's something I think you could call maybe the grandmother clause or the grandfather clause. That is that sense that somebody knows something and has kind of a gift. And when they start, you can hear in their voice and say, you know, let me tell you something. And just even from that beginning thing, you think, oh, you know what? There's something solid at the end. This is taking me on a journey by someone who cares for me, who is going to hold me in a way like my grandparents would have, should have, could have, right? Or I wish they had. And they'll take me on a journey of explanation and discovery, and they'll hold me and care for me in a way that that then gives me something at the end. And I think we're starved for that, to be honest, in this world. I think we get a lot of people trying to sell us stuff, trying to convince us of stuff, but not a lot of that sense of being held and carried on a journey. So that's part of, I think, what carves out the room for telling stories and hearing stories.
That's great. Joel, I really enjoyed speaking with you, and I'm looking forward to when we get to work with you again on the new book.
I'll send you a copy when it comes out.
Absolutely, and we'll do what we can with Jewish Book Council. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. The conversation here will be archived to YouTube and available for viewing on National Jewish Book Club online talks page and on YouTube on Jewish Book Council's channel. And I highly recommend that you go out and read Beggar King and the Secret of Happiness. If you haven't, I'm about to go pass my copy off to other JBC staff members here. Joel, thanks so much for your time. And if you have any questions for Joel, you can contact us and we'll forward them along. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mary.